Good afternoon and welcome to our virtual Roundtable 6.0 on intelligent orchestration of the retail experience, powered by Zebra Technologies. My name is Justina Eitzinger and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Images Retail Middle East. In retail, the customer is the main channel, the center of a retailer's decision-making strategy towards creating a harmonized shopping experience. With a considerably disrupted retail landscape, the terms unified, omnichannel, and seamless have given way to harmonized, integrating the physical environment with digital technologies and human experiences. The most successful omnichannel retailers have been able to facilitate their customers to use any of their channels at any point of the process for the first time or the umpteenth and have a consistent, seamless experience. And it is through this harmonized retail experience that brands are today able to create new revenue streams, increase their market share, and grow their businesses. Today, our virtual roundtable with our accomplished lineup of speakers will focus on some key areas of differentiation for retailers through last mile fulfillment, through minimized returns, and importantly, by orchestrating a harmonized retail experience.
I like Justina's introduction, and I think probably the key line of that introduction for me was the fact that the customer is the channel. This is a complete turnaround for many retailers who focus very much on what products am I supplying, what stores should I have, what locations, what should they look like, and then how do I get into online and e-commerce. The reality is you need to be where your customer is. The customer is the channel. So wherever the customer chooses to be, wherever they choose to look at your brand and understand your business, that's where you need to be. And a lot of us having to think very, very differently about how we set up our businesses to deal with that. The impact, I guess, of COVID has been a strange one. Supply chains have been interrupted. Many stores closed as part of the COVID regulations. Others stayed open. But the ones that closed, obviously their demand dropped off, so that impacted revenues and margins. But some retailers, such as food retailers, saw huge spikes in sales, and that was hard to deal with as well. So we had both extremes. There were other surprising positive impacts as well, felt, I guess, by certain product lines, which could be things like webcams. They sold out. Home fitness equipment sold out in many countries. And indeed paint and DIY materials, as people spent way too much time at home staring at walls and deciding they could paint their home. I think in my observation generally across the world, and this is talking to people in the region, but also in Europe and in the US, what we've seen is an increase or a catalyst impact of COVID. The change was happening anyway. So COVID's acted as a catalyst, speeding up that change, that shift to online, the way that we need to focus on the customer. And some commentators say that 4 years of change or more has happened in 4 weeks, certainly early on in the COVID process. So online, many countries, their online retail sales have doubled over the COVID period. That may settle slightly, but we're certainly going to see a long-term increase in the overall online retail business. So today's session is looking very much at not just the impact of COVID, but what are the underlying changes that retail is being impacted by at the moment? How do we look differently, and how do we need to look differently at retail going forward? And how do we start to think about retail in a more collaborative way, both in terms of as part of the retail ecosystem with our suppliers and customers, but also as part of the community as a whole, because retail doesn't sit alone in its environment. So with that, we're going to go straight to the panel. And one by one, what I'd like everyone to do is tell us a little bit about their business and how you see the retail business, I guess, harmonizing or changing over the last year with your business. So let's start with Adel from Danube Home. Tell us a little bit about Danube Home and some of the impacts of COVID on your business.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I represent Danube Home. Danube Home is a home improvement store where you have a one-stop solution for furniture, garden, bathroom, tiles, everything you can think of in one area. So we really provide an end-to-end solution from a home improvement sector. And this year has been a very interesting year for us because we've seen different challenges which we faced in retail. I mean, talking about supply chain, the first problem which we experienced was, in February, March, where a lot of our suppliers in the Far East, they were having issues in providing supply and getting the materials made on time because the COVID began from there. And we generally buy our products from about 24 countries around the world. But even the other countries, their raw materials come from the Far East. So there was a huge supply chain problem which we faced in the first quarter of the year. And then once the supply problem started getting fixed, in quarter two, we saw a demand problem arising mainly because there were lockdowns that happened. There was a lockdown in Oman for almost 2.5 months. In UAE, again, there were lockdowns. Different Emirates had different stages. Luckily, most of our shops were not in shopping malls. We have standalone stores. So we had easier options when it came to lockdowns. But then we had a demand problem in quarter two. And like you mentioned, Mark, very rightly, is what's happened is generally summer as a period in the GCC for our industry is always a lull period, especially after Ramadan, because a lot of people want to travel. They go to Europe, they go to London, they go abroad for 2 weeks, a month. So in general, the local population, which primarily what we're dependent on, is very less. Now, when the lockdown happened, nobody could travel. Everybody was stuck over here. And a lot of companies had work from home policies. A lot of people were not comfortable in moving outside. So a lot of people were staying at home. So when this happened, we saw a surge in the home demand in quarter three. That is June, July, August, and now in September. And now again, it became a supply problem because globally, all the factories around the world, especially in the home industry, now as we speak, are fully booked because they're saying a lot of countries and all retailers around the world, their demand is increased. So now we've come back to a supply problem. But again, that's what it is. So we're dealing with it. But I guess that's a better problem to have than not having any business at all. So we're happy in this situation in that sense, at least.
Perfect, thanks, Adel. Let's move to Ashutosh. At Choithrams, where's the harmonization? Where's the shift that's been caused by COVID for your business?
Where's the harmonization, Mark? I think we are just coming in terms with that. In the last 4 months, when starting off March to maybe all the way till June, we actually didn't even have the time to think about if something was getting harmonized or not. Because the impact on our business was so huge. Stores were full of customers when they are not supposed to be there. Our order pipeline was running late by maybe 4 to 7 days on certain times. So there was a line that I used to say every day, that every night when I go to sleep, I used to pray that COVID goes away. But in the morning when I used to look at my daily sales report, I used to feel like maybe it can stay for some more time. A 1.5x increase in sales, a 3x maybe increase in offline sales. It was unheard. It was an extremely challenging time. The toughest of all situations. I think before we started the panel, all of us were talking about work from home. We actually did not get a chance to do that. Most of our frontliners, most of our teams, even at the back end, had to continue coming to office, continue visiting stores. So it was a very, very challenging time. And within all that, we had to fix our operations because the sales were just going through the roof. As Adel was mentioning, we were also having supply challenges. So we had to keep that. Being in the essential sector, it was important that we didn't run out of milk, we didn't run out of butter, we didn't run out of bread, we didn't run out of pasta. So it was extremely critical that we kept our shelves full and going. So it's been an interesting time. We've had the time now to breathe a bit because as the lockdowns relaxed and the customers and the people got fed up of staying at home and started going out a little bit, we could see the pressure easing out from our stores and from our offline online operations as well. So it's been a tremendous time in which we have learned a lot. I think what we have learned is how elastic our operations were. I mean, we never imagined that we could handle such a huge surge in demand so efficiently. Every time you sit for budgeting, you will have the stores, you will have the operations team, and every part of the business asking for more people, more resources, and everything, and maybe not growing their expenses, but not growing sales at times. But during this time, we realized that within the same set of operational infrastructure, we could really do a lot more. So I think that learning was amazing of what we could do even in difficult times. So I'll be very glad to share what happened during that, because the journey of supermarket retailers or even hypermarkets was really very different from most of other retailers. It was an interesting one, and we are glad that now it is kind of normalized to a large extent.
I think there's some great points in there, Ashutosh. I think
I would like to add something, if that's all
right.
Yeah,
fire away.
I would like to completely agree with Ashutosh. COVID has in some ways broken a lot of myths. Everybody had a lot of misconceived notion, including myself, about so many things. And relating to what he's saying, around 12% of our front-end staff were stuck outside in India and Philippines and Egypt, and they were not able to come back because of the COVID restrictions. And same way, every time we have a meeting, the branch managers always ask for extra staff. But this time, with the limited staff, they were able to do and handle 30%, 40% higher sale. And nobody was complaining because even the staff were earning higher incentives. And they're like, let the staff, I hope they don't come back, because they were earning 30, 40, 50% higher commission than they would normally do. And talking about deliveries, Abu Dhabi had a restriction where they would not allow more than 2 people, or in the truck. So technically, generally, when we would do our deliveries, we'd have a team of 3 people. But now we had to manage with 2, and then we realized that we can do it. And this way, our efficiency in logistics also improved. So both ways, a lot of myths have been broken, and a lot of new learnings that have come out from the whole COVID experience, which I think will also sustain post-COVID for most people over here.
So that's a good segue in. So what we're seeing very much from the home side and from the food side is very much there are to a great extent positives, surges in demand, and really positive ways of you as retailers showing agility and being able to react to that. If I look at more the fashion side and the sports side in terms of Southern Sand Sports, Bhavna, I guess this may have affected you and your retail business a lot differently. What's been your experience?
Well, I think all the points that Ashutosh and Adel made are were kind of true for almost all brick and mortar retailers. I think we were at some level luckier from the perspective of even though we were a traditional brick and mortar retailer, about 6 years ago, the CEO had launched the .com version. We're a 45-year-old brand as Southern Sand Sports, so a huge part of the local population has actually grown up with the brand. So for us, really, the biggest, I think the COVID-19 has been the best possible lesson in the 20 years of retail for us. I mean, if you go back to the myths that we're talking about, Normally the CEO is always calls the teams incredibly slow because, he's got a certain vision. He wants to get there really quickly and we can't. And it's always a roadmap we draw out, which is like 18 months long or, 24 months long to say that's how long it's going to take for us to transform. And even though we'd been live for 5 years on the .com, we hadn't quite gone into the home fitness space because it's big box. It's slightly different from a user experience perspective of how you shop apparel and footwear, and putting on, getting the logistics right of getting treadmills delivered to homes and installed, etc., was a completely different ballgame for us. And at the same time, we could have it up and running in less than 2 weeks. So again, you learn that, things can be done. Was it the best experience from a user perspective? Probably not. We could have done a whole lot better had we had more time. But again, it was about speed to market. I think what the food industry did for us, and I think for everybody globally, is the unprecedented speed of the consumer behavior in terms of consumption change. So, you were talking earlier about 4 months and 4 weeks and 4 years. I'd love to be able to remember who I'm quoting at this point in time. I'd like to say it's McKinsey, but they said that the consumer behavior in terms of from offline into online was actually catapulted by about 15 years. That's how quick it was, because obviously it was a pandemic and it was from the essentials that actually essentially happened. The next category that obviously got hit in terms of having to quickly adapt was sports, because health and became an incredibly important element for consumers. So I think we learned a lot. We also failed a lot. And I think those failures probably taught us a lot more. So by default, when you add the home fitness category, your average transaction value is a whole lot higher than what you're trading in apparel and footwear. So our sales obviously went upwards of 500% on the .com. We were the only channel that was alive at that point in time. But again, you rally, you get every single brick and mortar team to kind of help support that. Logistics was obviously, I think, for everybody a nightmare. Last mile delivery was huge failures in multiple places like everybody else. But I think what that automatically did is it was a crash course in the gaps of efficiency. If you're a traditional brick and mortar business, you're kind of ignoring elements of integrity of inventory, for example. If you're sitting around the 85-90% mark, you're still okay. And now it's, your requirement is upwards of 98% if you're going to play in an omnichannel field. So I think, again, the best learning for us was, the agility to and speed that we can actually react with when faced with a crisis, and when you've got the back up against the wall, you've got to do what you need to. And most importantly, the exposure of the gaps is kind of completely changed the way we're looking at the roadmap now. And, I love the words that are being used. We say omni-channel, you talk about harmonized. In all reality, all of the traditional brick and mortar retailers today are not harmonized, and that is the truth. And we've got a very, very broken value chain in totality, and the front end is being controlled completely by giants like the big five. We talk about the Amazons and the Apples. They're the ones who are completely changing consumer behavior. We're talking about, say, for example, contactless today. Sajan Sports launched the MPOS, I'd say about 6 years ago, when we were the first in the market, etc. But there wasn't that much adoption at that point in time. It's a very small percentage. Whereas you do Apple Pay, and even if you look at it as consumers today, I don't remember the last time I've taken my credit card out. So pandemic or not, it's the big boys that change the front end in terms of consumer behavior. So all you've got to really do is kind of fill the gap of saying, I'm not the one changing consumer behavior. I'm going to pay attention to the ones that are changing the consumer behavior. Keep a very, very close eye on what the customer wants. Like you said, it is the channel. That is the one that you need to be paying attention to. Not quite look inside out, which is, this is what I have to offer, but more, what is it that I want to solve for my customer?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then kind of work your way backwards. That's essentially, the biggest revelation we've really had.
I think that those are great points. I think any retailer these days who think that they are the ones that are going to change consumer behavior, is pushing against the tide. Is probably a good analogy on that one. And you brought up many great points.
Sometimes it's important to follow, not quite really lead.
Yeah, and I guess where we need to start looking at is how do we predict what consumer behavior is going to be like next year, the year after, etc. And you talked very much there about the shift online, and actually being fortunate that the business had already made that shift online and learned some of the lessons a few years ago. So you were able to again adapt that quickly. But you also talked about how COVID in this very short period of time, I think everyone has echoed this so far, has shone a spotlight on bits of the business that maybe were too relaxed, or maybe were not quite as agile or as efficient as others. And I know all of your businesses have looked at those and have started to make some changes. I want to turn now very quickly to Hozefa, because you come from obviously the technology side, Hozefa, and consumers' behavior has changed, and in many countries, I guess, has shifted towards, we talked there about using cards and Apple Pay and contactless there, but actually the whole shopping experience has become a bit more contactless. We've shopped from home, or if we have gone to the store, we've tried to avoid people, we're wearing masks and various things. What have you seen in terms of the demand for technology, Hozefa? Has that shifted over the last 6 months? You're on mute, sir.
Apologies. Okay, so I think as everybody has already spoken about it, there has been a paradigm shift. And to echo what Bhavna, Adel, and Ashutosh have spoken about, a dramatic shift in the consumer behavior. From a technology vendor perspective, we are into the business of providing digital voice and digital identity to the assets, inventory, and the people of an organization. And that allows organizations to get tremendous insights and analytics about the operational aspects of all these three key pillars of their organizations. During the pandemic, obviously, it's initially started with a bit of a shock. Everybody was wondering what's going to happen next. And a lot of leaders, as Bhavna said, did identify opportunities in the downturn, and they quickly identified the gaps and said, what's next, and how do we now drive technology to bring the benefits that will allow us to take advantage of scenario. So from purely technology vendor perspective, what we did see was increased technology adoption into businesses that wanted to go from brick and mortar to online. So we started seeing a sudden surge in demand from companies asking us to provide them solutions that will help them mobilize and go online as quickly as possible. Bhavna spoke about challenges around logistics, but that's another area where we saw a surge in demand for technology, because logistics companies were under tremendous pressure to try and deliver things to home where people earlier were coming into the malls, right? And probably what we saw was when we engaged with a lot of our customers, we were privy to their plans 3 years, 4 years from now, how they want to go omni-channel, how they would like to look at the emergence of the new millennia and the consumer behavior around it. Those plans that were panned out for 3 to 4 years later were suddenly pulled forward, and they were really struggling to see how do we make it happen today. And those priorities were a reflection of what was happening to the consumer behavior in the marketplace. Initially, there was a lockdown. People were sitting at home. As you rightly pointed out, people went onto the online channels. They wanted to shop online, get as much information as they could. And that put pressures back onto the traditional organizations to say, how am I bringing up visibility, information that my customer needs? And do I have the channel to be able to fulfill the demand of those customers? Once the lockdown eased out and people have started going into the malls, or people have started going back into the traditional way of their shopping experiences, yes, things are not the same. There is social distancing, number of people that enter the store. There is a restriction on that. I'm wearing a mask. I want to have very limited contact. So earlier, where I would reach out to a store associate and be surrounded by them, today I would prefer to have a more meaningful engagement probably over the digital channel, and then try and look out for somebody who could assist me, but with the most available distance as possible. In these scenarios, we have seen emergence of contactless payment. I think that's something very, very visible to everybody, right? We go into the restaurants, if you want to look at a menu card, they bring up a QR code. You look at, you take your phone, browse the QR code and get your menu online. And when you make a payment, more and more organizations are encouraging contactless payment, right? So you just are able to tap your card. Around that, what we are seeing is customers are now increasingly asking for self-service kiosks, and a way where they can get information in their hand, either through their mobile phones or either through a self-service device that can provide them the information that they need to complete their shopping journey. So self-scan, self-service, contactless payments, these are the emerging technology trends that we have seen shaping up in our market these days.
Perfect, thank you, Hozefa. You talked there about people shopping differently, customers' behaviours. You talked about logistics and the technology around that, and obviously customers are now shopping from home a lot more.